Today's episode of Socially Democratic is proudly brought to you by Dunn Street. Dunn Street is a progressive campaign agency that specialises in community organising and campaigns. We work with non-profit and community-based organisations, trade unions, progressive businesses and social democratic parties across the globe. Dunn Street develops community engagement and organising strategies to win campaigns both big and small, and they train engagement staff, volunteers and organisers in leadership and power building. And if you want to create change in your community in 2023 or what's left of it, then hit us up at dunstreet.com.au. Today's episode is also brought to you by Maurice Blackburn Lawyers. When you need support with a legal issue, it can feel particularly daunting. And that's why for over 100 years, Maurice Blackburn has been helping guide clients with their legal needs. They're here to help you when you need them the most, from workplace to medical injuries, class actions, occupational diseases, and wills and estates planning. As Australia's leading plaintiff law firm, they have the local knowledge and the national network with the experience that you can count on. And to find out more, just go to their website, mauriceblackburn.com.au. And finally, today's episode is brought to you by SwiftFox. Every moment on a campaign matters. You need the tools that you can trust, lists that are up to date, phone banks that can change minds, emails that drive donations, events that will energize the community both online and offline, and text blasts that distill your message perfectly. SwiftFox CRM is made for campaigners by campaigners. And to find out more, visit their website, swiftfoxcrm.com, to win your next campaign. Hello and welcome to another episode of Socially Democratic, your weekly centre-left politics and organising podcast that drops every Friday and that dives into the campaign issues of the day and the people leading them from home and abroad. And we're going overseas. We're doing our end-of-year wrap-up. This is our international politics review for 2023, and I'm going to be joined by the host of the Forging Links podcast, which is based in the Netherlands in Europe. Ali Hashem is going to be joining us today to talk about politics in Europe, in the Americas, in the Middle East, and also we'll touch on a little bit of African politics as well. So we're going to really be globetrotters today, and you'll all be skilled up and knowledgeable to talk about politics around the world and impress your friends. So that's today's episode. Don't forget to subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And be sure to leave us a review. Give us 5 stars on whatever podcast app you use. And for all the links, follow Dunn Street on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. All right, let's get to today's episode. We're taping this one on a Wednesday evening on the lands of the Wurundjeri people. And if you've been listening to the show, we're in December. It's our end of year wrap season. And one of the ones that we do every year, but we change the guest every year. And I don't know how that happened, but we've just decided to keep doing that. And so I'm excited about that. That means we're just going to hear different voices every 12 months. It's our international year in review. And to help me review what happened across international politics in the last 12 months, I'm joined by a good friend of mine who we've had on the show before. He's the host of the Forging Links podcast based out of the Netherlands in Europe. And he's a card-carrying member of the PVDR, which is the Dutch Labour Party. And he's a good colleague and comrade of mine. Ali Hashem, welcome back to Socially Democratic.
Thank you very much for having me. I look forward to reviewing what has been, I would say, a very interesting year for progressives, for the Labour movement.
You're battling time zones right now as well. We should acknowledge that for our listeners and our folks watching on YouTube. You're not in the Netherlands right now. You're on the west coast of the United States. So you've got a little bit of jet lag going on as well. So we appreciate you joining us to have a very in-depth, detailed conversation about geopolitics. So I hope you've got lots of Red Bull into you or whatever it might need to sort of, keep the eyes awake.
You know what? I found something very interesting about the States. Everything has caffeine in it. I mean, people are just living off caffeine here. It's like, I think just water, you have to double check if it doesn't have caffeine just thrown in just to keep you going. So I think Absolutely. I had one in those Dexter gel candies. Everything's just caffeinated. I think the air is caffeinated.
except their coffees aren't caffeinated. The freaking coffees are the fucking
You know
worst.
what? They just have so much coffee. I was like, how can they have so much coffee? And I tried it. It's completely ineffective.
It's weak. Like when you, as an Australian, when we like, particularly Melburnians, we love and pride our coffee. So when we do travel overseas, we kind of want to hunt out the best coffee joint. And it's getting better in the States, particularly if you go to the bigger cities like New York or LA. But if you're in a more regional center, like where you are, it's tough to find a good, strong coffee. And you actually need to ask for like a triple shot just to actually get the taste.
I asked for a double shot, and they said we don't do that. So I was like, all right.
See what I mean? Exactly.
Yeah.
And I would say, well, mate, I don't do coffee for you, so I'm going. All right. Well, let's get into it because we've got a lot to cover. And I figured, even though you aren't in your home country at the moment, let's start in Europe. We had you on the show just recently talking about the Dutch elections, but I just wanted to sort of recap. You've had a bit of time to reflect on the year, which was a busy year in the Netherlands for electoral campaigns. You had the provincial elections earlier in the year, and then obviously you had these surprise national elections that happened in late November. Just your reflections on Dutch politics.
So if you look at the provincial elections, what was worrying there for the Dutch Labour Party was that there was this new movement of farmers movement that was coming up. It's called the 3B, which was like an alliance of people who were mainly disgruntled with the European limitations on nitrous oxide, that emissions that were set by certain farms. And it goes back to a legacy of World War II, where they were trying to industrialize farming to combat all the various issues with regards to malnutrition post-World War II. And kind of that snowballed into a whole legacy of different governments doing very different policies towards farming. And then it all culminated into a moment where basically you had to have a political party to represent just farmers to fight essentially against emissions regulation. So that was worrying for the Labour movement because, of course, in the European Parliament, the Labour parties in Europe were pushing through the European Green Deal, which went ahead and was supported by Timmermans. Timmermans became the leader of a joint list of Labour and the Green Party in the parliamentary elections. So we thought it was going to be like a moment where people would be placed in two categories. You either were for the future and support the Green Deal, or you were against. And that was going to be what the campaign was going to be based on. That led to our alliance with the Green Party. I'm also a Green, most of the Labour Party members became Green Party members and vice versa. And it really became a synergistic relationship after the provincial elections, where the farmers' movement won like 20% of the vote. They gained 137 seats out of, provincial seats, so there's about 600 seats. It's still significant for a party that was fairly new. It was the first time they stood in the provincial elections. So it was expected that they would potentially win the parliamentary elections. That rolled over. Parliamentary elections came in November. We had a strong list, strong policies centered around the Green movement, around workers' rights, improving progressive matters of today, making sure women's rights were enshrined in law, protection for abortion rights, things that we all consider to be progressive. Now, what ended up happening, of course, in the parliamentary elections is we did come second. We got 25 seats in the end. The ruling party, VVD, who are, I would consider conservatives, but they're more liberal conservatives, they gained 24 seats, so they lost they were number one before. And the outsider party, which was considered to be a far right, Now, when you say far right, you need to be very clear these days because they are economically leftist in the sense that they want more exclusive rights for citizens in terms of worker rights or housing support, etc. So their economic rhetoric is, I would say, pro-labor, but their social, cultural, political rhetoric is completely far right, very exclusive and it's all about othering everyone else, essentially a bunch of racists. But it's a party of literally one member. The leader, Geert Wilders, he gained 30 or so seats, and he got the majority. He got not the majority, sorry, but he got the most seats. Now there's a discussion whether he would lead a new government or not. Who wants to work with him? You have the centralist Christian Party was obliterated, but one of their members set up a new party of his own. He gained 20 seats. So when I looked at the figures and the numbers, I don't think a lot of people changed their minds as such. I think the Netherlands is they stuck to who they vote for. Now, what they did change was their strategic voting. So some people who used to vote central went either to the left or to the right. So the centralists were obliterated other than the Christian center. But they also, it turned out that they're not so progressive. They're a lot more conservative. So if, in my opinion, they're not centralist. They're also conservatives. So if you were to look at like a UK system where it's Labour on one side and the Tories on the other, the Tories clearly gained the majority of the vote in the Netherlands, distributed between far right and central right. Did we do well? We gained seats. We gained more than what we had before with the Greens, but most of the gain came off the back of what was previously D66 and Zestig, which is, well, not previously, but they are still there. But they used to have something like 24 seats themselves, and they lost about 15 of those. We gained 8, so that means we didn't even gain all their losses. So clearly some people from the democratic, centralist left, center, literal center, didn't all move to us. So though we came second, though we had the best result in years, it wasn't enough for us to clearly move forwards with a progressive government. And so now I think most likely we'll be in opposition.
Can I ask you this? And we sort of touched on it a bit when we did the actual full podcast on the Dutch elections, and I've had a bit more time to reflect on it. And it's a view that I hold, broadly speaking, about all the challenges that all social democratic parties have. And I'm sure plenty of the listeners have heard me go on about this before, but I just want to sort of check it with you again. Did the Labor Party, take into account all of the wonderful policies that you listed before, which are all incredibly important and are, to speak to the values of the progressive movement and social democratic values. But did the Labor Party fail to communicate or frame their campaign narrative to the voters of the Netherlands in such a way that the centre, like moderate suburban folks, that would be more than likely to be persuadable voters? So I'm not talking about the base, I'm talking about people that actually decide elections, that they just weren't able to frame a narrative and a story to them that they could say, yes, that's who we're going to go with. And my supplementary question is that was part of the reason why that narrative didn't connect with those voters, because they went into an alliance with the Greens. I mean, it's hard for me to get a sense of what the language of the campaign looks like, because it's all in Dutch, right? So I always try and translate it, but I'm never trustworthy of the Google Translator if it's actually if it's destroying someone's good creative work that's in Dutch, right? But certainly from listening to what you've been saying, it was kind of like we're coming to the electorate to say that we're the Labor Party and we're in this deal with the Greens, and the central premise to our campaign is really about the environment. And if I'm wrong on that one, let me know, because I know that if we did that in Australia, we would get our asses handed to us and we wouldn't win. And I know that most social democratic parties around the world, that would be the same predicament. That may change in the future when younger voters become, the center, the big block of voters, right? But right now they're not, and they're still dominated. These votes are still dominated by the boomers and Gen Xers, who have a different attitude to what their priorities are. And their priorities are jobs. And I'm just wondering, did the Labor Party, where's the challenges do you think the Labor Party faced in this election campaign, and what does that look like going forward?
Well, if you look at young people, and that's like everyone talks about the hope that the young people will basically, when they grow up, they will, they vote left, and as they grow up, they will continue to vote left in the future. That's where the future is. These elections were interesting in the sense that half of young people voted for the right and half voted for the left. So how can you expect that they are the future when even now, while they are young, they're not fully with the left? We have more educated student votes coming towards us than any other movement, but that's not enough, because you look at the amount of people going into higher education, university level, it's not getting to the same peaks as before. Education isn't seen as the main tool of social mobility. Wealth, or finding ways to gain wealth, only capital gain, is seen as the best way of social mobility. So, and then in that case, I'd say the Green movement and our alliance with the Greens, it was actually beneficial, because it made it clear where our investment is in the future in Europe. And we had already done our investment and our bet on the European Green Deal. So there is a particular Dutch European circumstance that you can rely on. But did it translate to a mass movement? No, because the one thing we're not doing, and we haven't done, is invest in community building, is invest in actually being present where people are, being present in their struggles. We talk about people's struggles. We are really good at communicating what the struggle is to people, not with people, not from people. We don't empower people to speak about their stories. We speak on their behalf because we say we know best. And I think that's where we're going really wrong. The people that want us to be there for them don't want to lend us their voice. They want us to empower their voice. And I think that's where we're completely failing. And that's where we are still seen as part of the establishment that has wronged people, in particular the Netherlands. We had a few scandals with regards to social security. We had one of the biggest scandals, which basically made the government resign and had a re-election previous 2 years and now again, more than 2 years, was because of the social security benefit scandal, which meant that a lot of parents were wrongfully taken to court, wrongfully assigned scrutiny on the amount of benefits they get from taking their kids to daycare. We can go into that, but it's in the past now. But the Toeslag affair was a big scandal, and we were, coincidentally or not, our previous leader, Lodewijk Asscher, he was before Timmermans. There was two intermediary leaders, but he was the Minister of Social Security or Social Affairs at the time. He was the minister when the scandal came out. So for as long as we're still, and Timmermans represents still part of that elite establishment because of his role as a commissioner, or what I call like a prince in Europe. If you go to the European Union, Brussels, they are kingdoms. Each one of these commissions is a kingdom in the sense the budgets they control, the influence they have. And so for as long, how can we be, Labour is traditionally an anti-establishment party. We are there to combat the capital or the capitalistic institutions, the feudalistic institutions, the fat cats, you know, we're there to fight that. And right now, I think the UK has a similar problem, and a lot of other labour movements are suffering from this, is that they're just not able to shed and return to their anti-establishment roots. And that's why parties like Wilders comes up, uses our economic policies, but with a right-wing anti-establishment scent, and people enjoy the fragrance and go and vote for the right, because they speak in an anti-establishment approach.
You've given me a nice segue there. Let's go across the English Channel to your former homeland, and keen to get your thoughts on the prospects of how Labor there are looking. Certainly all the polls since Jeremy Corbyn lost the leadership after he led the party to its worst election defeat since the 1930s. And Keir Starmer is now the leader, and certainly based on all the published polls, things are looking great for Labor. I just want to get your thoughts on what we learned about British politics in 2023, because it was another interesting year at number 10 to start with anyway.
Yeah. Okay. So we won a whole Labour. Because I used to be a Labour councillor in London, we won a whole bunch of by-elections. But guess what? When I was in the UK Labour Party in the time of Ed Miliband, we also won a whole bunch of by-elections. It's traditional that by-elections are a really good indicator of, the sentiment. It's a good way to vote against the government, because most people are disgruntled by or express resentment for the government policies of the time. It's really good for local elections to have a Tory government. You're more likely to win in Labour. I won in Hammersmith. We won in 2008. Well, it was a Tory government at the time. So, and we defeated the local Labour. The Labour defeated the local Tory party at the time, but the National was Tory. So this idea that by-elections are an indicator of the future of where Labour will be in government if an election in the coming spring does happen, should not be the basis of how we campaign. But I think at the moment, where Cameron is going, where the Labour movement is going in the UK, it's with the sentiment like, don't talk, don't say anything until an election is announced, and then we will start campaigning. However, when crises do pop up, like the crisis in the war in the Middle East, that starts to show the danger of a policy of silence, the danger of not stating where we stand, in particular to how we would want to run governments. But if you look at, there's certain movements like Progressive Britain, which is now basically the think tank that runs the Labour Party in the UK. They're doing a lot of groundwork, I'll be honest. They're doing a lot of work with businesses. They're doing a lot of work with institutions to show the credibility of the Labour Party. But guess what they're not doing? They're not reaching out to people. They're not building communities like before. They're depending on the local Labour parties to continue doing that work. So the National Labour Party is working with lobbyists, and the local Labour Party is expected to work with people. And I think that divergence is probably going to be the Achilles heel of the UK Labour Party.
In what way? Do you think there's going to be a disconnect between the policies that the party's going to come up with at the election and with
massive disconnect, and the issue of the vote for ceasefire in Israel and the Palestinian territories is an indicator of that fault line. And I think I spoke to you way before the war started, that if Labour continued doing what they did, which is this policy, this like, let's take it easy, like keep everything calm, we're winning in the polls, so let's just keep that going. We don't need to do any crazy policies. Anybody who goes out of line is to be brought back into line. We have a socialist whip. For me, it's a famous whip. We're very good at issuing that. I was in Hammersmith, I was a deputy whip, so I know we're really good at bringing people back into line within the party. But the danger of that is that the local party, the local parliamentarians, the local councillors, when it came to this call for ceasefire, found that they couldn't support the National Party, they couldn't support Stammer, who said, no, we will not vote for that. I understand the reasoning for it. I understand the approach. I understand that this comes off of the back of the leadership of Corbyn, which had some controversy with regards to anti-Semitism. So I understand the need to be very clear, like, we can't fuck this up again. We can't mess this up. We need to just take it easy and focus on the UK and focus on make sure people are safe in the UK in that sense. Like, let's not add more division to the world. I get it. But you can't deny that there is a lot of passion, a lot of energy, that anti-war, essentially energy that started from, the pacifists in World War II, all the way through the anti-Iraq war sentiment, all the way through to what we see today is a call for a ceasefire. But I don't want to go too much into that. I just want to use that as an indicator of where the fault line can be between individual party members who are in leadership position or parliamentary position, and how powerless they feel in influencing national policy of the Labour Party, and locals and local councillors. We've had resignations. We've had local councillors becoming independent as a result. I don't think that's a healthy indicator. And guess what? The Tories haven't started attacking us, like ruthlessly attacking us. And that's what I expect when when the elections are announced sometime next year, or they're expected to happen before January 2025. The Tories will come all guns blazing, and all they have to do is just question the credibility of the leadership of the Labour Party in its ability to represent Labour values, traditional Labour values. They just have to set this doubt. And I saw that doubt also affecting Timmermans in the Netherlands. Is he really a Labour leader? He's a very elitist. He's very eloquent in how he talks. The language he uses is not a working class man's language. So that it just, the doubt can destroy our possibilities of winning a Labour government in the UK.
Can I be a devil's advocate on that one, Ali?
Sure.
And say to you, and I understand the central thesis that the central thesis that you're making there about that certainly the activist base of the Labor Party feel disconnected with the leadership of the Labor Party, and it was exposed over the decisions around voting on the ceasefire or the position of a ceasefire with respect to the war in the Middle East. But the voters, when they go to vote in the Westminster elections, are not going to vote on what the Labor Party's position is on a war on the other side of the continent. And that if I was the Conservatives and I want to create a doubt about the Labor Party, I would be creating a doubt about the Labor Party about being too left-wing, not questioning their Labor values. And I think what Keir Starmer is trying to do, whether you agree with it or not, what he's trying to do is he's trying to make himself a small target. And he's not trying to give the Conservatives an ad campaign that he's been whipped by his radical base. Because that, in the end, is what killed Jeremy Corbyn and he knows that, and so he's trying to stay in the centre.
Yes, that is definitely the strategy. My doubts about that strategy is that we struggle in the UK to bring out the vote. So we're very reliant on mobilizing activists to bring people, to convince people on the day to come out and vote. There is more than one parliamentary district that has a significant margin of minority voters who can turn this election around. They can turn this election by not going out to vote. So in London, for example, where we have a majority of Labour parliamentarians, if certain minorities choose not to go out on the vote on the day because they have certain doubts about Labour's positions, the Tories can win, and all we have to lose is 3 seats in London to then have the snowball effect. So what the thing is, in order to have a majority, we need to make sure 100% we have the seats we have now and gain some. I think
but the polls are showing that you are going to pick up seats. Like you're going to all the seats that you lost at the last election, particularly in the northern part of the country of England, not of Britain, are likely to come back to Labour. And there's a whole bunch of seats. But isn't there a whole bunch of seats that you won under Corbyn? But wasn't there a whole bunch of, we'll come to Scotland in a minute, wasn't there a whole bunch of seats that under Corbyn that you did pick up that, like Kensington, that are just not naturally Labor seats? Like you won them because there were a bunch of wealthy toffs that decided that the Conservative Party had deserted them in terms of their social values and voted for the Labor Party because Jeremy Corbyn. But honestly, they're not our people, and we're probably going to lose those seats anyway. And that what we are going to win back is actually our working class heartland in the north. This is fun. Keep going. What do you think about that?
Well, Kensington, I'll tell you something about Kensington. Of course, Hammersmith is a neighbouring borough. We won Kensington because the Tories were complacent about it, but also we managed to mobilise people. We managed to get people. We were surprised to win it, for sure. But now that, in retrospect, we're like, oh, well, that was expected, because there are certain demographic changes that were occurring where you had too many, the Tories actually didn't have the base they used to have. There's a lot of, due to the high prices and due to properties being taken over by foreign investors, that eventually, like, they don't have anyone left. And still the patch lands of housing estates, like council housing, they're the ones that we managed to mobilize and bring out. And, you have things like Grenfell Tower and the tragedy there, like that touched people. And that made people like mobilize and act. Of course, timeline, I think that would still work in our advantage in terms of Kensington. So actually, I think we would probably keep Kensington. I think we would lose Tower Hamlet, which we barely gained back from essentially like the mayor there and his party. I think Galloway is threatening to run in the mayoral elections, and I think he would most likely, George Galloway, will probably re-establish his Respect Party and maybe even win Tower Hamlet or any region in East London because of the problem because of the whole ceasefire Israel-Palestine issue. I think there's a couple of areas like Bolton, Luton, where we may still win them, but not significantly enough to cause a snowball effect on other marginal areas. Right. So what will happen, if we talk about mobilization, what could happen is by-elections were really good. I remember we would get shipped out to by-elections. We would campaign on the ground. We would knock on doors. We would do all of that. But when you have doubts about your own seats that you have, it means there are a significant amount of activists won't be able to go to the north, go to the countryside to campaign on behalf of Labour to bring out the vote because they're too busy, have to stay in their home boroughs to make sure we actually win, still win those. So I think it's a matter of effective mobilization. the by-elections have been won because the Labour office has been fantastic at mobilizing its activists across the country.
Yeah.
You can't do that in a national elections
No, that's
because
true.
everyone has to stay home and campaign at home to make sure they get their own seats.
Well, they just need to get
So
organised.
resources might not be there.
Yeah, exactly. It's about organisational capacity. If only they knew someone who knows how to do community organising. Let's go north of Hadrian's Wall, shall we, to the land of my fathers and Scotland. Things are looking on the up in Scotland. Obviously, I know that you've come up with this thesis that, you win by-elections, it doesn't count for the general and all that kind of stuff. But they did win. They took a seat off the SNP. And any chink in that particular nationalist armour is a good sign, because for a long, long time there, it looked like Labor was not going to be able to make any headway into knocking off any of the seats of the SNP, either at a Holyrood level or at a Westminster level. But they've just won the when I was over there earlier in the year, they picked up Rutherglen and Hamilton, which was a great victory against the SNP. They've got Anasawa, who's the leader in the devolved Parliament in Edinburgh, who is a very charismatic guy. Things look more promising in Scotland for Labor.
Promising for Scotland, I think yes. For the Scottish Labour Party, yes. Is that significant enough to give us more presence on a national level, on parliamentary level? I have my doubts, and that stems from the fact that I believe most of the gains we made is because the SNP have some internal problems. And those,
without a doubt, I mean that's the thing, though, isn't it? This is what's actually undermining the SNP in the eyes of Scottish voters. Like, for example, I know this is completely anecdotal, but my family, part of the Irish Catholic diaspora, Labor voters all their lives. The Indy ref happens. Labor campaigns hard for better together. In the eyes of those voters, they're like, oh, hang on a minute, we didn't think you were going to do that. Go and vote for someone else. Voted for the SNP year after year after year after year. Nicola Sturgeon and all that stuff happens, and they have a look at them and go, are you just a bunch of corrupt nationalists? And they're starting to come back to the Labor Party again. And I think that's happening across the West of Scotland, where the majority of the seats are up for grabs, right? And they've just won one in Glasgow, and I think they might win more. So there is an opportunity here for the Labor Party in Scotland to take back the things that would be a lay down misère for them.
If we're talking about antidotes, I have one. You've seen the flag raising on the Celtic fans for Palestine?
Uh-huh.
It's crazy. Like, everyone's like, oh, this is great. There is a massive anti-establishment sentiment there, which I love more than regardless of the politics of the particular situation. I think it was a great showing of anti-establishment sentiment. The SNP have done a great job at becoming the new Scottish establishment. And I think if we can keep hammering them that way, we got a massive chance to overturn it. And I love the Scottish spirit, anti-establishment spirit. Like it's almost like the SNP became the new Westminster, and then they're going to get hammering that way. However, if we're talking about Ennis is a dynasty in of himself. Like, his father was a parliamentarian, and people do recognize that. And I think that hopefully he'll do a better job at shedding that past, and I think he has done a good job of that. My surprise was that his counterpart it's very strange. Ennis was more establishment looking for a long time, and I forgot the gentleman's name, but his counterpart in the SNP was really like this, roll your sleeves like Labour guy, and now that's completely reversed. My concern is when it comes to national elections, the SNP will be able to remind people that they're fighting against Westminster, and I think the Tories will feed that really well when it comes to Sunak and all his bunch of cronies and their establishment. So that I see a contradiction. national Labour policies will affect negatively on Labour in Scotland. And if Ennis can really make a showing and really become an independent voice from National Labour Party, and people recognize that. I'm not saying he verbally says things against Starmer, but just show that he has control of his own, has control of the Scottish Labour Party, and the Scottish Labour Party is fighting for Labour values that affect Scottish people. It's a bit nationalist in that sense, but I think that strategy has a better chance than if he surrenders his campaign to the National Party.
Hamza Yusuf is the leader of the SNP in
yes.
Scotland. And you can do a whole podcast on that, the relationship between those two. I think they actually went to the same school together.
Yes,
but anyway,
yes.
we've got a long way to go.
Coincidentally enough, I think in 2009, I emailed both of them and, just like, hi, I want to, come up to Scotland and see you. I emailed both of them. Of course, he's SNP, but Hamza replied and was like really positive. So, but I don't think now if I email him, he would reply positively. I think so. That tells you something about how the dynamics keep shifting between the two. It's very romantic, if but I guess they're not. They don't sway that way.
Well, I mean, it is also quite intriguing in itself that you have two sons of migrants from either the Middle East or Central Asia are now leading the two major political parties in Scotland, which I actually think is a very predominantly homogenous kind of society. I know every time I go back to Scotland and walk around Glasgow, I'm always struck by how non-multicultural it is. I'm trying to say that in a polite way compared to growing up in Australia. Anyway. Let's keep moving, shall we? Let's get on a plane and fly to more sunnier climes. Let's go to Spain, and I want to get your reflections on what happened in Spain this year.
So if you hear the news, you will get a feeling that the Spanish Labour Party won the elections. They didn't win the elections in terms of the most seats, but what they did is essentially stop the right from having enough seats to form their own government. So they came second in the elections to the traditional Tories, the PP over there. But what the struggle there is will Spain significantly move not just to the right, but also go to the far right. So Vox, which is a far right party, was expected to make a significant amount of gains. That became the mobilizing factor for the Labour Party to make some gains themselves. So I think in Spain, the Labour Party equivalent won because the far right was on the rise. It wasn't because people believed in Labour values. It wasn't because people wanted the Labour movement to continue be in charge of Spain. It was because the threat was just so enormous. Why does the Labour movement need things to get so bad for people to get reminded that we exist? I think that's also a deficit for us. And I think in the Netherlands, there's a danger as well, and across Europe. And we'll get to Poland, where things become so bad. The rule of law comes under threat. Democracy itself as an institution comes under threat. And then people go, you know what, now I'll give the Labour movement a chance. I find that a very sad reality. And I think Spain is an additional indicator. Sanchez has managed to be reinstated as prime minister recently through an alliance with Catalonia, which is problematic in of itself, because Spain, the Spanish Labour Party has a significant voice on a European level, and to support a separatist or get the support from a separatist movement is problematic on a European level. Nevertheless, a win's a win, and we'll just roll with it type situation. I think Timmermans was hoping for something similar, but it didn't work out in the end.
Let's take a quick break to talk about SwiftFox. Every moment on a campaign matters. You need the tools that you can trust. Lists that are up to date, absolutely. Phone banks that can change minds. Emails that drive donations, and events that will energize the community online and offline. And text blasts that distill your message perfectly. SwiftFox CRM is made for campaigners by campaigners. And to find out more, go to swiftfoxcrm.com to win your next campaign. Okay, let's get back to the show. And today's episode is brought to you by Morris Blackburn Lawyers. Morris Blackburn have a Melbourne-based opportunity for an experienced social media and communications professional to support their marketing and employment and industrial relations law teams. If you are highly creative, a technical specialist with strong stakeholder and relationship management skills, then Morris Blackburn want to hear from you. The campaigns and communications specialist is responsible for executing the social media content plan, largely supporting the employment and industrial law team, but will also have exposure to other areas of the firm. The successful candidate will develop and implement content that will drive traffic and engagement to Morris Blackburn's practice areas to ensure that the practices remains a leading voice on social media. This is a great job opportunity and will ideally suit an established progressive campaigner looking for a new opportunity in a great professional environment. To find out more about the job or the details and all that kind of stuff, just go to morrisblackburn.com.au/careers. That's morrisblackburn.com.au/careers. It's funny in Spain as well because it is such a federated republic in that it is holding together a whole bunch of different diverse views about what Spain is, and a bit similar to France as well, but the French have taken a completely different approach to it. The French are very much, you are French first and that's it, right? You kind of leave your diversity at the door if you want to come here. Whereas in Spain, they've tried to roll with it a little bit more. And
let's just be clear: the French don't believe France is first. They believe there is only France. There's no second, third.
No, that is true. I know. Well, I mean, you think about the Basque lands, cover that top right-hand corner of Spain and then go over the mountains, the Pyrenees, and then into France. And the identity of the Basques in the Biarritz, the southern French region, is completely obliterated compared to then what it is in the Basque lands in Spain, right? It's and the same with Catalonia. They've got their own parliament, and so the Spanish have really tried and work with this. And I can understand the challenges now for the socialist leader in Spain having to rely on separatist votes or rely on Catalonian votes. Yet that is a predicament, right? How do you keep Spain together whilst being reliant? It's a bit similar to, it would be like as if, we're not the Tories, but it'd be like as if the Labor Party was reliant on, Sinn Féin votes or the SDLP.
That's a possibility, by the way. That's a possibility. That might
they don't take their seats in Westminster, Sinn Féin, so they technically can't. Well, they won't anyway. But the SDLP, right, who are a nationalist party in Northern Ireland that want to see a 32-candidate Irish Republic. So yeah, it is difficult. I wonder how that will play out and how long. My question is, what kind of stability are we going to see from the Spanish government going forward?
I mean, not long ago, the DUP propped up the Conservatives. So
they've done it twice.
Yep. So
they did it for John Major as well. It was an absolute disaster.
Okay. Spain definitely has its own challenges. And you're hearing now, but look, when we gain governments across Europe, it's not just about winning the governments themselves. It's about a whole bunch of institutions that we're able to actually put the Labour people into, especially on a European level, because you gain that ability to nominate people. And that's something I worry about in the Netherlands, is that if we have a right-wing government, all these European institutions that the national governments are able to nominate people towards will become like far right or right conservatives. In Spain, that's where that's where the biggest win is what they can influence on a European level just because they actually have government for the time being. But I think on a national level, they will continue to struggle to maintain that sentiment. The biggest, and it's a good moment to go to Italy for a second, and just since the win of Meloni there, she has really portrayed herself as somebody that can that the conservatives or the center right can work with, even though she's far right. Like it should be unworkable, but guess what? That's been the legacy of Europe for a long time, is conservatives propping up populist leaders in hope of suppressing the labor movement or the left or progressives. And it's always ended up badly for the conservatives in the long run. And I think the Netherlands and Italy will reap what they've sown in terms of propping up populists. Hungary's already far gone. Bulgaria, a few other European countries are far gone. Poland, we'll get to Poland soon there. And I think Spain has saved themselves from that circumstance. But my worry is we're trying to stop the inevitable.
Let's talk about Poland, shall we?
Conservatives.
Talk to me about Poland.
I was fortunate enough to be in Warsaw a couple of weeks back. I met with the judges who were significantly affected by the populist PiS Polish government, which has been ousted by a centralist party, or they call the Civic Coalition. Note, they're not Labour. It's not Labour. It's more like liberals who have won in Poland. But who they have ousted is this populist, again, people who express Labour values, economic Labour values, but with a nationalist, conservative, social conservative sentiment and political sentiment. I met the judges, and it's just very surreal to be in a country where literally the rule of law was dismantled or significantly affected, where there is a paradox of, if they try to fix the situation, they have to do something illegal. So the previous government made something illegal that affected the judiciary, and now to fix it, the next government has to do potentially something illegal or unconstitutional just to fix it. That is the paradoxes that democracies will have to face in the coming 20 years, where the tools and rules and democratic constitutions are going to be bent so far back, but not broken. But in order to fix them, you might have to break the metal and hammer it back into place, because it will snap when you try and swing it back the other way. And Poland is an example of that. Everyone I think, should keep an eye on Poland. What was great about meeting those lawyers, and I met the judges, I met lawyers who had campaigned, went on demonstrations against the government. Look, judges are not supposed to be political, but they had to be in a situation where they were basically being banned from practicing as judges, or being basically taken to court for being judges. They have this term for neo-judges, which are judges that have been politically appointed by the far-right government in Poland. And they don't know what to do with these new judges. Like, do you just fire them? Or do you... And also the abortion rules that were put into place, the restrictions, if you were to remove those laws and basically say that restriction that the far right put into place if you annul that law, you have to annul a whole bunch of other rulings. Like potentially criminals could be released on a technicality because of this ruling. So if you annul that, you have to annul a whole bunch of, because basically the way they do it is they say that it was illegal for these judges to make rules. So they have to annul all the rulings that occurred in that time. So it's complicated in that sense.
Yeah.
Great that the Polish people, who, by the way, the Polish spirit, if I was to bet on the future of the European Union in terms of spirit and heart, you have to go to Poland. That's where the heart of Europe is or should be. Now, I'm talking about a particular heart, which is a dissident heart, one that is, when attacked, mobilizes itself and comes out on the streets and fights and is bloodied and struggles. I saw that and I witnessed that victory in Poland, and I was lucky. I was lucky to go after the change. So after this new elections that occurred in 15th of October. And I have a lot of hope. That's the one place I think in Europe, I think they called it something like the youth quake in Poland. That's the only place I think in the whole of Europe where I'll be like, you know what, where the Polish progressives go, I want to be there with them shoulder to shoulder because of how they mobilize themselves. Did you know that judges would go to rock concerts, like festivals? They'd go there, they hire a tent, and they would teach people what it means to have rule of law. Why is it significant to protect the rule of law? And these judges that I had conversations with, they never expected to become that kind of person. They were expected to just focus on the law and implementing the law and just be locked up in their courtrooms and making judgments from there. They had to mobilize themselves to re-educate people on why and what has happened because of political decisions. And that's incredible, but also sad at the same time that a judge has to become politicized, but not political, as in politicized in their role. They have to justify why they exist and why the rules exist and what's their importance. And I think that trend will continue, but definitely a lesson should be learned and a spirit should be harnessed from the Polish resistance.
Shall we move away from Europe and maybe head to the Americas? I'm interested to get your thoughts on Argentina that had elections just recently.
No, I wanted to just mention the significant victory of the Labour Party in the local elections in Albania. that should definitely, we should take note of that. I know they're not the most transparent elections, but Labour won, so I guess a win's a win, regardless of how transparent or positive it, regardless of the type of Labour, right?
Why are you not finding hope in that experience in good old Albania? Let's not do that, Ali. Let's stick with Argentina. Tell me about Argentina.
I think for me, the most significant thing was what's the gentleman who won the libertarian? How can you even describe this guy? You can't even say he's a populist because he doesn't actually have any kind of it doesn't have a movement behind him as such. He's almost like an individual who has risen with I could best describe it as anti-woke mentality.
Is this are you talking about the president, the new president of Argentina?
Yes.
Which is
a local.
Oh, the guy with the shocking haircut. I don't know how to pronounce his surname. Milei.
Milei,
Javier
Javier.
Milei, is that
Yeah,
it? Yeah. Let's just call him John. Yeah, continue.
they call him a loco, which is the crazy one. So I think that's a good description of.
His hair's crazy enough, let alone what his politics is like. But yeah,
I think one video in his campaign really caught my eye. Is he went on like a whiteboard, and he would say things like, "Ministry of Women gone, Ministry of this gone, Ministry of Environment gone," and all these different regulations that we would see as progressive and positive and in the right direction. He's like, "Oh, gone," and it's like so simple that would take place. And look, his victory isn't a landslide as such. It was really marginal, but nevertheless, I think to me it shows the significance of the international narrative of the far right, or the anti-woke, Trumpian, you had Bolsonaro in Brazil,
who lost to Lulu,
who did lose, but I think that trend is still catching in some other countries. And I think the latest casualty of that trend is Argentina, which is this idea that the world is in this battle between those who are woke and those who are against wokeism. Or, well, I mean, that's their language, literally. Like, they're the ones who framed it in that way, or the United States conservatives or right have framed that, and I think Loco has significantly benefited from that sentiment. But look, Argentina has been plagued for decades with financial problems, with an economy that has stagnated and struggled. So it does have some institutional and structural issues that no government up to today has been able to overcome. Maybe they have to go. Maybe they have to go all loco now, and do that. I don't think that's a good strategy, but some voters seem to think that's a good way to go.
Look, picking up on that previous point you made prior to your economic solutions, which is to go loco, about this argument that, or this narrative with global politics that we're seeing this swing to the sort of this far right, and you've given examples in the Netherlands. Obviously, it happened in Italy, but we've also and in Argentina. But we've seen and not that the far right now have control in New Zealand, but obviously Labor lost the election in New Zealand, and the the Conservative Party there will have to go into a coalition with something that would be the New Zealand equivalent of a far right. They're not that far right compared to some of them in Europe, but certainly they have those tendencies as populist right-wing tendencies. But at the same time, there are examples of it where we are seeing Labor and social democratic parties win, like in Australia, like the entire continent of Australia, so I'm excluding Tasmania here, is completely governed by Labor parties at a national and a state and territory level. The United States, the Democrats continue to win at the ballot box. Trump has won one election and only one, and that was in 2016, and I think it basically caught everyone by surprise. We've seen a return back to the centre-left in Brazil. Despite your pessimism, I do think Labor is going to win in the UK next year whenever those elections are going to be held. Spain managed to hang on. Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, exactly. Of course, that's why you're on the show. So there are examples of it, and I do think there are swings and roundabouts, and I don't think that. I think really, and I'm really going to simplify this here, but I think Labor parties and social democratic parties lose when they're shit, basically. Like when you don't come up with policies that voters care about and that you don't have a campaign that cannot communicate that to them effectively and make an argument for it, that's when you lose elections and people look elsewhere. And I don't say that in I don't mean to have a crack at the Dutch Labor Party or the New Zealand Labor Party or anyone that's lost elections, but generally speaking, we lose when we're not very good, because in the end, the voters are always right. The voters are always right, and they may vote for a far right party or they may vote for a centre right party. It doesn't mean that they are racists, or it doesn't mean that they're natural conservatives. They've just decided on that day when they walked into that ballot box, on the information that had been given to them, that they've decided to go with someone else, and they'll change again. And so I don't think there is a thread that's happening around the world right now. I just think that we need to be better. And to your point, so I reject that. Not that this is your thesis, this is the thesis of the right. It's a backlash against wokeism. No, I think it's actually just a backlash against shit campaigns and shit policies that are disconnected from what people want. If you can, as Bill Clinton always said, let's make it about their lives and not about ours, and everything will be okay. If we can construct an argument that says we understand what's going on in your life right now and we're going to fix it, then they'll go, you know what, I'll vote for that. As long as it's authentic and clear and concise.
I don't disagree with you. I think it's a good sentence. I think there's, especially with Argentina, there's this late stage, side effect of the whole Trumpian or Trumpism approach. There is just they're just late to the game. Let's just say in that sense. And you're right. We need to campaign better. We need to campaign not at people, but with people. We need to get their voices out and not just our voices as politicians or as campaigners. That's where our strength should be and has always been. When the way I imagine the labor movement started was in the pubs, two, three people, saying, you know what, this situation is really shit. Like, we need to do something about this. And, one guy who's more political than or girl or more political than the others would say, you know what, we need to come together, and this is how you build a movement. Let's mobilize, let's unionize, that is part of our legacy that we, I believe, continuously ignore. And unfortunately, we've been rewarded too many times for not going back to our roots in that way. And I think that's negatively affected us in the long run. So you're right, when things become as terrible, it does not mean people are voting for the right or the far right because they believe in those things. Yes, they do not believe in the far right. They could swing right back towards us if we actually show them that we are not there because we believe in something and they should support us, but because what we believe is what they believe, and we will do what they want us or need us to do. There is that democratic sentiment that we need to continuously believe in when it comes to, like we're saying, the people believe in us or need a reason to believe in us. And that reason should never come from what I think as a politician. That should come because people say, I want things to be better. Or you know what? Ali, Stephen, Harry, William, Mohammed, Sarah, Zahra, these are people who can best articulate that on my behalf. But for too long, we just tell them, this is what Labour believes. You should vote for us. And I think sometimes we've just been rewarded. And I think Spain is an example of where the Labour Party was rewarded, not because they were good at campaigning, even though there was really good mobilization in some areas. It was because the far right was just too loud and became such a threat to the very fabric of the republic, to the very fabric of everything that we fought the Civil War for. Just backlash to that. It became like, okay, we're going back to Franco times. And people got scared of that and were like, you know what, let's do it. Not because Labour was good, but because... So I really would like us to go back to our anti-establishment roots, fight against power.
Ali,
and
is it anti-establishment though? Like, I don't think voters give a shit about that. No,
but
working family in the outer suburbs.
I like the rhetoric of anti-establishment. So
don't get me wrong. It sounds amazing.
You have to give me something.
Sounds great on a podcast. Sounds great on a podcast. People are going to lap it up. But I just don't think voters aren't dropping their kids off at the school and saying, the election's on Saturday, who are you voting for? And I said, you know what, I just want an anti-establishment candidate. They're not saying that. They're going, I want to vote for the candidate that's going to make sure that my childcare fees go down.
Yes, but there is a certain element of people's love for a sense of charisma in who they actually want to. Basically, they want people that represent them to be almost like them, but better in a sense of like, oh, you know what? I think the best politicians who can win these days are ones who people can look to, not because of how great of a leader they are, but because they say, you know what, if I had dedicated my life to politics, if I had dedicated my life to campaigning, I would be that person. And I think that's the greatest type of leader you could ever have. And I think New Zealand somewhat had that with the Honourable Lady
Jacinda.
Jacinda, I think, did a great job at doing that for a while. And I think it's amazing that she chose to just, I wouldn't even say step back. It's almost like step forward and say, there is more to life than just this for me. And I think I look forward to we had that in the Netherlands where some male politicians said, I'm going to go step forwards and look after my family instead of politics. But they did it at a time when they were on the weak or at a loss. So people are like, you're just stepping away because, you see no more victories. But I think Jacinda did it at a moment of high. And I think she will be respected for that. And I think people should not underestimate the significance of the legacy she will leave behind as a result of that, of the bravery to step forwards in that manner.
Let's talk about. I know we're doing a review of the year, but actually, I'm keen to get your thoughts on what you're looking forward to in 2024. Based on how much time we have left, Ali, I'm going to let you pick one area that things that you're looking forward to, and I'll pick one.
So, of course, we didn't manage to talk about. We only briefly touched on the Middle East and the ongoing, essentially, war in Israel and the Palestinian territories. I was very hopeful before October because in September we had the largest progressive protest in Israel against the judicial reforms, which were very similar to reforms that had occurred in Turkey many years ago, and then in Poland, where the right or far right was trying to change the very fabric of democracy and rule of law to their benefit. And I think that movement has been completely stamped upon by the war. That it sounds, it's difficult to say because of the scale of the suffering of people literally on the ground at the moment in the Middle East. But I think that was one of the first casualties that was shot down, which was a progressive trajectory for Israel as a democracy, when that had to be put aside because yet again a war and a conflict occurs in the Middle East. And that I look forward to that being resolved in a humane manner the war in the Middle East at the moment. I think a lot of people will struggle to see where that will come from. But my hope, and if I was going to work on, my hope is in the labor movement in Israel. Because I think if you listen to some of the politicians there and what they're saying, they want the solidarity of the world with Israel, but they want the solidarity with the democracy of Israel, with the progressive values that Israel espouses, with the values of socialist Zionism historically, which is about creating a place for a safe place for people who were suffering and who are suffering. And I think if we expand that enfranchisement wider, the labor movement is an internationalist movement. The struggle in the Middle East is a struggle of economic class, is the very struggle that we have been fighting for as a labor movement for the last 150, 200 years, which is about wealth and capital deciding the fate of people. And I reject that. I reject all governments, institutions, militias, movements that espouse a status quo of diminishing the power of people and the power of their will in a fair and transparent manner, which has been wanting in Israel recently and has not necessarily ever existed in Palestine.
I do wonder...
or other parts of the Middle East.
Yeah, and it's to pick up on your point there, I've been thinking a lot about, less about, well, I have been thinking about the conflict. Obviously, it's so front and center, but I've been trying to think about what happens when the guns go silent, and where you go from there. And I'm wondering, will the events on October 7 be a moment of resetting the direction of what I'll call the peace process? And I'm putting it in air bunnies because it's, sometimes it certainly doesn't look like a peace process, and hasn't for a long, long time under the leadership of Bibi Netanyahu and Likud. But will it be a reset of where it heads? In a similar way to the events of the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin and the beginning of the Second Intifada. Because before that happened, you could look at, the Camp David, the Oslo Accords. It really started to look like things were heading in the direction of a pathway to a lasting peace and an end of the conflict between Arabs and Israelis in that part of the world. And then you have these two events, right? And it goes the other way. Labour eventually loses government in Israel. Hardliners take over in Israel. Hardliners take over in amongst the Palestinian community, and we're further and further away from peace. And now we have this moment, and I'm wondering, on the back of what you were talking about before, these mass protests day after day after day across all the cities in Israel against the Netanyahu government and against their policies about trying to undermine the judiciary, which is a part of the democratic fabric of Israel. That when these guns go silent, I think the current coalition that Netanyahu is in government with falls apart. I actually just think it falls apart. I think it disintegrates, and I think there are fresh elections, and I think we see a more centrist government elected, probably under the leadership of Yair Lapid and his Blue and White Party, but Miriv Michali, who's the leader of the Labour Party, and Maretz and Labour and the Arab list as well, the more progressive elements of the Arab list, get elected and form this new coalition, rainbow coalition government, and resets domestic politics in Israel, but also then begins to reset its relationship with the Arab world, and reaches out and tries to find like-minded allies in a pathway to peace with the Palestinians. I mean, I'm now, as I say that aloud, given where we are right now, that sounds like it's it's fairy tale stuff, right? But I think I'm just wondering that out of this absolute atrocity that and this the darkness of this conflict, that something good comes from it. And I one thing I would put money on, I do think Netanyahu's government falls. As soon as the conflict's over, they're out. There's so many polls that have already indicated that have held up. A friend of mine who I've had on the show before, who is a pollster that lives in Israel, has been flicking me a lot of internal research. And Netanyahu is gone. Like, there are so many Likud voters that have historically supported him that are not going to vote for him and are going to vote for Lapid. So that I'm sure of. What then happens after it, that's what I don't know. But I hope to God that we start to see the moderate voices in both the Palestinian and the Israeli side get together and say, how the fuck are we going to work this shit out? How can we coexist and live with each other in peace and harmony amongst our own two secure borders? That's my hope.
I second that. I think Netanyahu is responsible. Look, I think it's crazy that if any other leader in the world was faced with this situation, they would have to resign on the day after. As a matter of respect to the failure of the promises and the sacrifices people made of their liberties for that security, the judiciary reform was part of the package of sacrifices of liberties for the sake of the promised security, and that was violated on that day. And so it would be only the most respectful thing to do is to say, I failed and I resign. Didn't do that. And that was an opportunity for him to save face for a legacy in the future. He would have turned around this whole like nepotistic, corrupt approach to democracy that he's been running for. He would have been able to become a real hero for everyone on that day. Didn't do that. You know what he could have done? He could have done that resignation, went and put on his IDF uniform and go and actually secure the borders, and that would have turned him around into like a real hero in the eyes of Israelis. Didn't do that. Continued to peddle rhetoric and basically go with carpet bombing as a solution. Since when has carpet bombing ever worked for any government in the world as a solution and a bringer of peace? It's a bringer of war. The biggest benefiter of this war in Israel, I'm not talking about globally, I'm talking in Israel, is Netanyahu and people who want to continue to stay in power knowing that they're on the out and they're not going to save face. And I think that what is a struggle is, and we need to make sure, being against Netanyahu must not mean being against the Israeli democracy. That when they start doing that, that's going to be really dangerous and a very big slippery slope for Israel as a democracy. And I think that's the biggest threat, but also a bigger hope is that will then be a reset within Israel. But then I look at the Arab counterparts with their corrupt rulers, with their I cannot believe that Bashar gets to somehow be welcomed back to the Arab League and sit there so calmly to talk about atrocities after everything that he and his government did.
In Syria.
So I think there's in Syria. How can that be acceptable to everyone sitting in that meeting? Like, in no way, any respectable leader should have walked out from that meeting and said, I cannot sit on the same table with a person who overtly has committed atrocities against his own people. So I think there needs to be a balance in response, in the sense that if Israel is to reform, I think Arab nations need to wake up and also reform. My hope is a thriving democracy based on an educated, aware population. Egypt, in the next 4 days, will have an election. The military-backed leader, Sisi, will probably win, if not with a larger majority than the one he had before. So your hope must lie not in just, we must not lay responsibility only in the hands of Israel to reform and do things better. It needs to be on everyone else. Democracy, liberal democracy, one where there is free elections, one where I hope a party of socialist values could win, is wanting. I'm more likely to see a socialist labor movement-backed government in Israel than I am in any other part of the Middle East, with the exception of potentially Turkey in the coming years. So there's one thing there. In terms of 2024, things to look out for is the South African elections that will take place. And it's all connected into this, because we have this socialist but yet populist real character. I have a secret crush on him, but for wrong reasons. Julius Malema is really like, he's been popping up on my YouTube shorts. And, I like his approach, and he's got a certain African charisma about him that is not necessarily a Mandela-like, because Mandela's a lot calmer. This guy's a lot more energetic. There's a really big likelihood that he will win the elections and become the next president. He has some significant economic reforms that could reshape the whole of Africa, and not necessarily in a liberal democratic sense. He has some very communist approaches to economic policy. Not to say that South Africa has been a great place for progressive values. It's been very capitalistically driven for the last couple of years, actually, since the time of Mandela, unfortunately. And I think in order to curb that, I think the ANC needs to become very serious about the economic inequality that exists in South Africa, and other countries, developing countries, terrible term, need to take note of, including in Europe. Inequality is the biggest threat to democracy and biggest threat to rule of law. And the Labour Party need to go back to fighting inequality, because if we, and I think Stammer is trying to avoid that, for example, but if we continue to be blind to the inequalities that exist within countries, yet alone on a global scale, we will see some really the continuous trend of populist rhetoric, even from the left. But let's be hopeful. I think when Malema gets into government, he will realize, I think a lot of people will bow down to the threat that he presents, and that could potentially be a positive economic reforms within South Africa, which has been a very economically apartheid continuation in some sectors of the economy. And I hope more reform there.
Fantastic. Well, I think we've covered the globe here, Ali, and I do appreciate your time on today's podcast in going through this conversation. There's been some great back and forth, and I've enjoyed it immensely, as I always do, whether it be on a podcast or if we're having some beers by a canal somewhere in Rotterdam or Den Haag. It's been great, and I thank you for your time for coming on the show today, and I wish you and your family a great festive season. Good luck with the podcast in 2024. If you haven't checked it out, Forging Links, Ali's the host. It's a new social democratic campaigns podcast, very much focused on talking about what's going on in Europe. You should have a listen. And other than that, thanks for coming on the show today, mate, and look after yourself.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Thanks for listening to Socially Democratic. Did you like the podcast? Hit the follow or subscribe button and be sure to leave a review on Apple Podcast or Podchaser. And to get all the latest on Socially Democratic, follow Dunn Street on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. And we'll see you next Friday. Socially Democratic was brought to you by Maurice Blackburn Lawyers. Maurice Blackburn Lawyers have spent more than a century paving the hard path to justice for everyday Australians. They've helped over 500,000 Australians turn their situation around, and they know how the system works. Their experience and skills means you'll get the best results possible. Find out more on their website, mauriceblackburn.com.au. Maurice Blackburn, experience you can count on. Socially Democratic was brought to you by SwiftFox. Every moment on a campaign matters. You need the tools that you can trust, lists that are up to date, phone banks that can change minds, emails that drive donations, events that will energise the community online and offline, and text blasts that distill your message perfectly. SwiftFox CRM is made for campaigners by campaigners. To find out more, go to swiftfoxcrm.com to win your next campaign.